My wife was a cheater and secretly fled abroad, but I got my children back through an international court and took a DNA test. One day, I, 41M, and my wife, 39F, will celebrate 13 years of marriage. Together, we have 3 children, a 10-year-old boy, a 12-year-old foster daughter, and a 5-year-old girl. To be honest, they are everything to me. Years ago, while we were both employed at a hardware shop, she and I got to know one another as co-workers. Now here's the thing: when my father saw my firstborn daughter, he remarked the child didn't look like either of us. He kept this from the public. Since the faces Don T seem to have gotten close to resembling one another, I have to admit that I have never been able to identify whose traits the baby has when they are babies. I was unable to spot the resemblance myself, but it seems that many of my older relatives have always been able to recognize them, even in a baby's face. But I honestly didn't mind, since my father has always been a troublemaker. I was too enamored of my kid to be swayed by his supposition. The actual problem arose, however, when I saw a notification from someone named Justin on my wife's phone. It was only preserved as Justin, but we both knew a Justin from way back when who was the cousin of one of our co-workers. Since she was in the room with me, I couldn't confirm whether this Justin was the same one. However, I was only able to view the words "I'll remember last night" for a long time, as they appeared in the message notice. She was supposed to be out seeing a movie with her daughters, so that didn't seem good to me. This naturally gave me a great deal of suspicion. I made sure to check through her phone as soon as I had the opportunity, since I felt like it didn't sound right. My initial action when entering the conversation with Justin was to look at his profile photo. Yes, it was the same Justin as the one we knew at the time. Even though he was obviously a bit older today, I couldn't forget the face since I had spent almost the whole day at the shop back then. To be honest, I didn't believe she had kept up with him either. Truly, everything about the circumstance was wrong. At that point, I began to worry about what may be in the messages. A little voice told me to put the phone down and forget about it, but a louder one urged me to check it instead of being a coward. I therefore took that action. That alone was sufficient to provide me with the reassurance I was seeking. She had lied to my face and left the home for no other reason than that it was obvious that they had slept together the week before. It is very difficult to put into words how I felt when I discovered my wife was cheating on me and caught her in a similar deception. The saddest thing of all, however, was that I had absolutely no clue how long she had been cheating on me. Had it been since this Justin man was in the shop when we were first dating? Had it begun a week prior? Or maybe they had been getting together every single month since our marriage. To be honest, I was going crazy about it. Although I knew I would approach her, to be honest, I had no clue how I was going to do it. I didn't want there to be any room for her to try to refute this, so the first thing I did was grab screenshots of the discussion and photographic proof, which I forwarded to myself. If she attempted that, I would be very irritated. I honestly had trouble organizing my thoughts, so I remained silent when she returned home. Even if I had to face her and question her, I wanted to make sure I asked all the right questions so I could catch her in a lie if she attempted. I wanted to go through every possible scenario. I was prepared for the fireworks that were going to happen, so the first week passed without my saying anything, but the next week did not. I began by inquiring whether she had heard from Justin recently. Even though she was unable to conceal her astonishment in time, she attempted to seem foolish. She asked, "Who is Justin?" I told her that he was the cousin of our co-worker, and she responded with a drawn-out "oh." She didn't respond to my first question, though, so I asked again, "Have you heard from Justin recently?" This was my chance to catch her in a brazen lie, and I believe she was analyzing whether or not I knew something already, or if I was just asking coincidentally. Before she talked at all, there was a clear pause. She was astute enough to see that I wasn't posing an unexpected question when I said, "Oh no, I haven't heard from him in ages." I must have let her know that I had knowledge. It was a total 180 for her. Actually, I think so. I think we might have spoken at some point recently. Why didn't you tell me? We haven't heard from him in ages. How is he doing? He's good, I guess. It's not like we talk every day or something, so I really wouldn't be able to give you a solid answer, she said with a shrug. You are right. I guess I'll reach out to him. Do you think that's a good idea? He and I could catch up on everything that's happened. I think that sounds good. I questioned her, knowing she was uncomfortable, as soon as I observed her froze when I said this. Even though I didn't want to, I couldn't help but laugh and shake my head at that moment. I know, you know what, she said, sounding almost irate. She sat silent for a long time before breaking down in tears. I know about you and Justin, quite obviously, and I beg you not to act like I don't know what I'm talking about because you know I do. Let's not do that song and dance because it's bound to make me very, very mad. She began to cry, burying her face in her hands. Although I've seen her weep before, I've never been more enraged as I was at that moment. When she was being drilled by Justin, she didn't think it was worth tearing over, so to be honest, I was furious at the time. But I was meant to think that her getting caught was this traumatic. To be honest, I was furious. She eventually glanced up, her tearful and red eyes telling me how sorry she was. She said that it had only occurred twice, that it was a grave error, and that she regretted it right away. She made the worst choice she could have made, claiming to be weak. I don't know why, but I had the impression that her claim that they had only shared a bed twice was untrue. I made the bold decision to lie, telling her up front that I knew it wasn't just twice. I informed her that because I already knew everything, she should reveal the complete truth. Our former co-worker, Justin S. cousin, had disclosed everything to me, I informed her. She began crying once again at that point, and this time it was more louder and more bothersome. She answered that she had slept with him a few times, but no more than 15, when I urged, "Tell me the truth." Despite my best efforts to be calm, I managed to pick up a porcelain ornament from the table in front of us and threw it into a wall. You have no idea how absurd it is to attempt to justify cheating by claiming it was fewer than 15 times. It seemed unbelievable to me. I rose up to leave the room after telling her I wanted a divorce. However, I told her one final thing before I left. I was going to have our children tested for paternity, and that was not negotiable. She seemed to be going crazy, and it was the most disturbed face I had ever seen in her. But I didn't give a damn. I thought she may do something very out of the ordinary. I quickly contacted my kids and asked them to join me for a brief pizza date. It was getting late, but not too late, and I had to make sure she'd straighten things up before I returned. She could throw any kind of tantrum at me, but I didn't want my kids to witness their mother in such a distressed manner. I was only attempting to keep my kids safe. I wasn't feeling sorry for her. When I pulled them out, she didn't appear to be concerned. With my kids standing in the doorway, I returned to her and whispered to her to gather herself before I returned in a few hours. I turned around and left with them after that. As promised, I took the kids out for pizza, which was, to be honest, a lot of fun. It resembled a little moment of joy and serenity in the middle of the night. My children can always brighten my days, and I adore them more than any parent should. The only issue was that I couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that these kids, with whom I was having joy, may not be mine. Are you aware of the agony that is? These kids have been a part of my life for a very long time, but all I could do was hold out hope. All I could do was hope that one day my children will be mine. It was preferable for them to have a mother and a father, even though I would never want them to grow up in a broken household. Since I wasn't sure if I could continue to be a part of their life if I discovered they weren't mine. That may offend you, but to be honest, it's far easier said than done. I don't believe they deserve to be seen by me in that light, and I would always be reminded that they were the result of my wife's adultery. Nevertheless, I'm getting ahead of myself. After that, my wife and I continued to live in the same home, and we must not have spoken to one another more than 12 times in a month. If you're wondering why I didn't eject her while I was asleep on the sofa, it was because I didn't think it was appropriate to concern my children. I was really trying to delay things, but eventually they were going to have to know what was going on. I served her with divorce papers at the end of that month. She began to weep once again, and I began to wonder whether this was a sign that she was really upset or if she was just unable to accept the consequences of her actions. I advised her not to complicate the procedure. She only has to sign it, and I'll obtain a legally required paternity test throughout the divorce process. If she was certain that she hadn't cheated on her partner, I assured her there was no need for concern. That's quite simple, isn't it? What I'm going to discuss is the current state of this entire mess, which is also the reason I am writing this piece in the first place. I honestly didn't believe I would have anything to worry about other than a straightforward divorce. I could have done it, but I truly need support right now because of a recent issue. One evening as I was leaving for work, my wife informed me that she wasn't feeling well and that she wouldn't be going to work. I didn't really care that she seemed to have been weeping the whole night. After leaving the house, I dropped her off at home with our kids. Was there really something to be concerned about, actually? Weekend time meant they didn't have to go to a friend S house instead. They could spend the day with their unfaithful mother. It seemed like I had a lot to be concerned about. When I returned home, the silence in the house told me right away that something was not right. I yelled for my wife and then my kids, but I got absolutely no reaction. That was concerning, of course, since to the best of my knowledge, they shouldn't have been out that late at night. I knew there was a problem the moment I walked into my daughter S' room. The room was considerably emptier, even if it wasn't completely empty. Upon opening the closet, I saw that several of the garments were missing. That's when my terror started. When I hurried to our room and opened the closet, I saw that many of my wife's clothing were also vanished. Suitcases were also gone. That is when I realized everything made sense. My children had been essentially abducted by her. Perhaps there was a more plausible explanation that I would discover later, but it didn't seem probable. It was obvious that there was no routine explanation for anything, since none of them were at home and there were a few less luggage and clothing. It was obvious that she didn't want me to know what she had done when I checked my phone and saw that there were no messages or calls from her. Yes, I was unaware that my wife had abducted my kids. It was such a jumble of feelings that I'm not even sure how to put it into words. I felt anxious, terrified, angry, puzzled, and alarmed. I made as many calls as I could think of, but everyone I spoke to claimed to have not heard from my wife. I made calls to people I knew in neighboring villages and relatives in the metropolis. I gave her some friends' numbers. I even gave a few of her coworkers a call. She wasn't answering her calls, so I had no clue where she was. I didn't know where she was for 3 whole days. After those 3 days, I was prepared to contact the police because I wanted to know where the lady had taken my kids, even though I knew they weren't in danger since it felt like a very deliberate move. I tried one more time to ask those closest to her, since I knew that going straight to the police would be a very difficult procedure for me. Though he didn't know where she was, one of her closest friends had heard from her. But it wasn't until I gave her parents one last call that I was able to figure out where she had disappeared. My kids were brought to her parents' home in Norway by her. Yes, she took my kids on a direct flight out of the nation. I knew it was pure wrath at this point, so there was no mystery about the emotions I was experiencing. Never in my life have I been so furious, and because that lady was still not returning my calls, there was no way for me to vent my frustration. I wanted to smash things, hurl things, and yell at people. But all I would end up doing was wrecking the home and yelling at the first person who even slightly irritated me. Thus, this is the current state of affairs. My spouse is now abroad with my kids, one to return my calls, and I've never been to Norway, so I'm not even sure where her parents are located. Of course, I could make the effort to get her parents to notify me, but would I really take my kids back to the United States by force? If I were to take the time off to travel there and do it, what precisely would be my course of action? I need to know what I would do if I were to find her and my children, even though I know for a fact that I can do so. I really don't know what to do, therefore I need your assistance, everyone. First of all, I am aware that there must be a legal requirement that prevents her from just taking our children over whom we have joint custody out of the nation. I can assure you that things don't operate that way. Hence, if any of you with more legal expertise could assist me in determining what I need to do, that would be very appreciated. Edit. She has finally gotten in touch with me, and I'm not proud of how easily I lost my cool and started yelling at her. I'd been dying to unleash loose on her, and now I had the perfect outlet. I took care not to squander it. I swear I must have cried out for 20 minutes nonstop. After I finished, there was a pause of around 30 seconds, during which she eventually said that she had only brought the children for a visit. I informed her outright that she was lying, along with a whole bunch of expletives, like how dumb does she think I am? Did she bring our children to see her parents without informing me? Purchased 4 airline tickets, disappeared from the home, took off for a different continent, and left me all alone for over a month? She made a poor attempt at gaslighting me by claiming to have forgotten. I hung up on her at that moment. Since then, I've been in a bad attitude. Edit 2. A commenter brought up the subject of international abduction of children as well as the Hague Convention on the civil aspects of international abduction. That addressed a great deal of my concerns about the legal ramifications of attempting to return abducted children to their home countries. I am prepared to contact a lawyer and do whatever action is required to reunite with my children. I would also want to see her imprisoned for the whole incident. I'll update everyone on my progress. Update 1. Hi everyone. I am here with a comprehensive update on everything related to my wife, who kidnapped my kids and fled to Norway. It is not like she informed me and I said no, since not only did she not have my permission to do this, she didn't even try asking. It really infuriated me that she simply up and left with them while I was out at work, and then she refused to get in touch with me for about a month. I've now been in touch with a different attorney than my divorce attorney to assist me in regaining custody of my kids. I was able to make a lot of progress after reading about a specific international treaty about child abduction from one of the commentators on my prior article, which helped me make that choice. I will make an effort to explain to you all the main points of the Hague Convention on the civil aspects of international child abduction. Recall that I am only a layman attempting to explain things. I am not schooled in law. If a parent takes their child out of state without permission, it may be considered abduction or kidnapping. If you have the police on your side, however, things should be resolved rather quickly since they cover the whole nation. However, what would happen if the kid was abducted abroad? The purpose of the International Pact is just that American police will not be allowed to actively assist. It records the child's habitual residence where they typically reside, as well as whether or not they were illegally taken. It was evident that my children's normal abode was in the United States, and it was a straightforward process to prove that their removal was unjustified. This is where I was able to really benefit from the assistance of my lawyer. He gave me an explanation of the pact, and I have given you one as well, things according to my understanding. He then started doing his duties, which included contacting local officials, submitting something with the Hague Convention, and a host of other tasks. Since I knew he would manage the surgery, I really didn't want to work out the specifics. My wife didn't appear to be fazed even after I made it very apparent to her that I had reported her to the police and hired a lawyer to assist me in the process of getting my kids back. I thought it was a rather dumb reaction, but she said that she wasn't going to stand by and let me ruin the family. After all, our family was being shattered in its own unique manner by our having to flee to another nation with our kids. Still, I knew without a doubt that her justification was absurd. With the prospect of a paternity test, I could see that she was afraid of what I might discover, or at least that was my takeaway from the whole situation. My attorney notified her and her parents in Norway of the repercussions if she chose not to return the children. Yes, the Hague Treaty and the police over there would make it simple enough to bring my kids back. But the lawyer advised against letting her know how it would affect her own life, particularly in a criminal context. A darker part of me wanted her to stay obstinate so I could make sure she would wind up in jail at the end of it all. But the other part of me wanted her to comply with the notice and return so things could be done as smoothly and simply as possible. The notification to her parents was different. It included the same important details, but also emphasized how her parents were effectively complicit in the kidnapping. She had 2 weeks to return my kids to their American home, according to the notification. I'll just go ahead and tell you guys how the nice things happened. My in-laws gave me a call exactly 2 weeks later. Initially, they engaged in some small talk, but it soon became apparent that they were struggling to express their feelings. After far too many uncomfortable silences, they eventually came clean and said they disagreed with the course of action she was choosing. They attempted to get her to change her mind, but she ignored them. They begged me to be more patient with her, promising to keep trying to persuade her to listen and act morally, but I told them I wouldn't act in a way that didn't follow the advice of my attorney. She deserved whatever came her way since it was already beyond the 2 weeks we had allowed her. She then flatly refused to return my calls, but her parents continued to do so. But it was all very annoying, and I thought I was going to go crazy at some point. She seemed oblivious to the potential legal repercussions of her actions. The good news is that, at some point, I received a call from my lawyer informing me that my children could be released from her. Sincerely, I was terrified that she would do something very stupid since, at this time, my emotions were all over the place. It seems that the Norwegian authorities visited her parents' residence, and although she was not placed under arrest, she eventually promised, after a protracted period of time, to return my children to their American home. Hearing this made me quite happy, since it meant my kids will at last be returning home. We could put an end to this whole story, and maybe attempt going back to our regular lives. Eventually, my children did return, but my wife had vanished from sight. I felt a lot of different things about this. I hadn't seen my kids in a few weeks, so the reunion was emotional and sincere, but I was also relieved to have them back. But it drove me mad that she wasn't present, although there was a part of me that was relieved she wasn't there. Also meant the divorce process could not advance, and she was shielded from prosecution for her actions. She didn't answer the phone when I attempted to reach her. Nevertheless, life continued on until I eventually had the courage to bring my kids in for a paternity test. I had to know that this one wouldn't pass muster with the court. I thought she had fled with them for that reason alone. I will never forget how devastated I felt at seeing the outcomes. It felt great to read to the 5-year-old, but not to the 10-year-old. It's difficult for me to put into words how hopeless I felt at the time. I have no idea how to describe it. The kid ID struggled for, standing right next to me, turned out not to be mine. I had raised and loved this kid for so many years, and suddenly I discovered he was someone else's. I will confess that my desire to end it was fueled by the despair and misery I was experiencing at the time. I detested it much. In the hopes that there could have been a problem with the first location I visited, I brought him for another test, but the results were the same. From then on, all I could feel was sheer despair whenever I looked at my kid. Although I had no bad feelings for him, I was really unsure of my ability to love him now that he wasn't mine. I had the impression that I would unconsciously start to lean more in the direction of the kid I knew was mine. Though it wasn't his fault he was the result of infidelity, I knew that whenever I looked at him, my wife's treachery would always resurface. Although I wasn't sure whether I would still be able to love him in a year or two, I still did. The worst thing was that I had nobody to throw my rage upon but my wife. As anticipated, she never answered the phone when I attempted to reach her. Her parents were decent enough folks, so I chose not to give them the drama, even though I wanted to contact them. But when I did contact her parents at last, it was because I thought I had a strategy that would allow her to return to the United States. I told them I simply wanted us to be a family again and that I really needed to talk to my wife. When she phoned me 3 days later, I told her everything about how I knew she had run away because I had almost destroyed the family. But I hadn't tested for paternity until I had, and discovered our children were indeed mine. I apologized to her, said I wouldn't pursue a divorce, and promised to keep apologizing to her until she eventually decided to forgive me. With hook, line, and sinker, she purchased it. When I brought up the paternity test, she appeared most startled, though she tried not to show it. We had a quick but fairly tearful reunion when she returned to the United States last week. The only problem is that she is unaware that this whole ordeal was a charade designed to allow me to bring her back into the nation. I promised my buddy I would leave the home for a few days, so there wouldn't be any uncomfortable moments, so I am at her place right now. Things are going to become very uncomfortable from here on out, and I am prepared to file for divorce. In order to prevent her from fleeing, I am going to make sure the cops apprehend her before they do. I'll update everyone on my progress. Update 2. Although life is difficult, I am pleased that things in my life have at last stabilized to some extent, even if my level of happiness has decreased significantly since a year ago. As I had previously told you all, I was finally able to bring my wife back to the United States. I made sure the proper actions could be done to ensure that she faced the law as soon as she returned by getting in touch with my lawyer and the police. After all she had done to me, I had to make sure I got her back. After many days, her kid was in school when there was a tap on the door. Although it pains me to write her son, I have come to realize that accepting things as they are is preferable than attempting to trick myself into believing something that isn't true. The cops appeared. They invited her to go with them. She didn't protest or ask many questions, so it wasn't really a great spectacle. However, when she turned to face me after she was led away, I couldn't help but sneer at her. Her family paid her bail. She didn't spend much time in prison, but at least it reduced the likelihood that she would leave the nation. I may then begin the divorce process as a consequence. To be honest, it was more court than I'll need for the rest of my life, but the entire divorce drama ended before her case was resolved. The divorce was really simple. This is a lady who, after all, fled the nation with both of my children. The court ordered a paternity test, and in the end, it was evident to all of us, though I was aware of the findings beforehand, of course, that only one kid was mine, and the other wasn't. That allowed my attorney to relentlessly argue that the kidnapping of the child was undoubtedly spurred on by her awareness of her adultery. I believe my attorney could have made a strong case to the court that she was a cheater, even if I didn't have screenshots of it. Seeing the results of the paternity test come to light was entertaining. I will never forget the sight on her face as she turned to face me. She looked surprised. I chuckled and shook my head, realizing that I had known all along. Obviously, given that this lady was not just unfaithful, but also committed a crime by kidnapping my child, given that I had no biological connection to the older son, it was legally an abduction for him, but the court showed her no mercy. She handed up full custody of the younger kid to me, since she already had her 10-year-old to look after. I avoided having to deal with alimony or give up the home or the vehicle. The court counseled her to track down and make amends with the child's biological father. Hearing it made it more clear than ever that there was a guy out there whose kid I had been parenting, and he was absolutely clueless, and I had a deep sense of revulsion. It ached. Well, it concluded the divorce process, and after having to bid farewell to the youngster I had raised for years as my son, I found it very difficult to live by myself. To be honest, I know a lot of you want to be able to connect to the choice I took, and I seem like a scumbag on paper. Perhaps I ought to have taken the kid in for adoption. It's possible that you may find the choice more difficult than it seems. Therefore, I really hope and pray that none of you will ever need to make it. When it came to her and her crime, I had to be there for every court appearance when she appeared in court on her accusation of abducting a kid abroad. Naturally, I had to do speeches, go on the stand, and do all kinds of terrible things, but in the end, she was taken into custody. To be honest, it wasn't tea for as long as I would have wanted, but in this instance, unlike the divorce case. The court was comparatively generous since the kidnapping didn't last too long. The kids were well treated with their grandparents, and only one of them was biologically my. Given that she still had a kid out there who would be living with a relative until she was released, it was surprising that he only sentenced her to 22 months in jail. I had prayed with all my heart that it would have been at least 7 years, but for her to cheat on me and for me to suffer through paternity fraud, 22 months would have been agony. That sentence disappointed my lawyer as well. Nevertheless, in the end, I came out on top in the divorce, and I was the parent of at least one of the kids. That, I believe, was the only thing that prevented me from acting rashly and going too far. Without it, I'm not sure what I would have done. She kidnapped my child, which I also succeeded in having her arrested for, and I saw that as a result of her infidelity. Without me, her life wouldn't be as simple, particularly once she gets out and has a criminal record. She also lost her job as a result of her unexpected trip to Norway. In an effort to preserve her image, I also make sure to inform everyone that we are aware of the whole situation. I always like doing it. I do feel sorry for the kid, but maybe she can persuade the father, whether Justin or someone else, to take responsibility. I really didn't want confirmation, but I had a feeling it was. And if it wasn't it would have just made matters worse. After everything, her parents gave me a call and expressed their sincere regret. I decided to set up plans with them going forward since I still have a warm place for them, and they still want to be in the child's life. I would never want to see their daughter again. That was the sole condition. We could all live in peace if they would adhere to that. But that is all I have to say. Being a single parent has been enjoyable even though it is challenging. All I can hope is that as the years pass, I can maintain my composure. I hope that my suffering may teach you all anything, so that you won't have to experience what I suffered.